Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our review of the reading comprehension paper from the 2021 selective test. So just to confirm, this was the actual test that the students in year 6 sat in March 2021. I think it's fantastic that they have uploaded this for us to have a look at, and hopefully that gives all of our year 6 students and parents a good idea about the types of texts, the types of questions, the standards of the exam, as well as any unique features that you may not have realized before. Just gives us a chance to go through and recognize these. For the purposes of this video, I will assume that you have already attempted the exam. So you've gone through all the passages and actually tried to do the questions, preferably under timed conditions. Just to confirm, the reading paper requires that students complete 30 questions in 40 minutes. Right? If you have not completed the test, I would strongly recommend that you stop watching the video right now, actually go and attempt the exam under these timed conditions, because that gives you the best feel for the actual test conditions. The purpose of this video is mainly just to review the questions and also see if we can share any insights or strategies for how to arrive at the correct answer better. Now, one feature that you may have noticed is with the very first text, this is an extract, specifically an extract from a narrative. In going with the trend of the selective exam in recent years, oftentimes when they incorporate, when they use creatives or stories or narratives, the way they try and make it a bit more challenging and also test out students' understanding and maturity is to incorporate some sort of cultural theme. So I know this one here, it says first experience of Mumbai, and it seems to be set in India. In the past, they have often had texts which are set, in different countries. There was one about, I believe, like a Native American sort of setting. Another one which was, again, I think it was something to do with an Indian family. So oftentimes these stories do revolve around cultural backgrounds, including, Indigenous Australian or Aboriginal backgrounds as well, just as a way, presumably, of testing out your maturity and your understanding of people from different cultures. The other feature that might stand out is in this story, given the passage as well as the questions, you can see that they've actually mapped out the questions specific to the paragraphs. So what I'm trying to say there is question 1 refers to the first paragraph. Right? Question 2 presumably refers to the second paragraph. If I go back, and you can see that this first paragraph, it was talking about how Bombay seems, what Bombay looks like. The second paragraph, matches up to the second question where it's talking about the fishermen singing. So the first 6 questions appear to be mapped out to each paragraph. And then the final 2 questions, you have to refer to the entire extract, right? And these ones would be a little bit trickier than the other questions. Okay, so now if we can resume the review of the actual questions themselves, starting with question 1. In the first paragraph, how does Bombay appear to Hari? So if we look back to the first paragraph, all this is asking about is when he's perceiving or seeing the city, what does it look like to him? Now, the way he describes, and remember, the key to this question is you want to think about the city itself. It's not about the water. I know it describes, the dull sea being peacock blue and emerald green, mentions all of those things. It even mentions the boats and how they, how they look like a shoal of dolphins. That's not what the question's asking about, right? So you have to read these kinds of what we call small details questions or detail-oriented questions. You've got to be very careful with the wording of them. It's asking about, how he sees the city itself, and it tells us that Bombay, looks like a white castle made of sand. Right? A white castle made of sand, and that would be the answer for question number 1. How does Bombay appear to Hari? It appears gleaming and dazzling in the sun, right? Gleaming and dazzling. I know it doesn't actually explicitly say that Bombay looked like it was gleaming and dazzling, but when you think of, a white castle, made of sand, you expect it to be, shimmering, right? Like shimmering sands. That's why B is the best answer. The other giveaway, if you're still confused about the word choice, it says gleaming and dazzling. Where does it actually mention that in the paragraph? Well, apart from the fact that it's a, it's a castle that's made of sand or salt, it says that it's blinding against the hot blue sky, right? Blinding implies that it's, again, shimmering or dazzling. Question number 2. This question says, question 2 is, You know, the farmers and fishermen sing and shout on the beach because, right? So again, it's talking about the second paragraph. Why are the farmers and fishermen singing, right? It seems a bit strange, to be honest, because at the beginning they told us that, you know, they are fearful about their lifestyle changing and they're trying to go for a protest. So why are they singing over here? Well, remember, you can look for keywords and follow on from those keywords to understand the context, right? Context is what you get when you read both before and after the detail and try and see where it fits in. Now it says, their voices rang from boat to boat, so that's them singing. They were all in high spirits, right? So we know that they're very happy. Then, you know, it follows naturally that the next sentence is going to tell us about why they're happy. It says, it was such a rare outing for them who usually never gave up a day's work to leave their villages. So these farmers and villagers, they don't get out much. It's very rare for them to stop their work and have an outing. So now that, you know, it doesn't matter what the reason is, whether it's a protest or some sort of unhappy occasion, in the moment, they're extremely happy and they're singing in high spirits because they get something like a bit of a holiday. Kind of like how, you know, as soon as restrictions ease and you guys go out and about, you know, you get like a bit of a holiday and you can sing and shout in happiness. Well, I guess this is the equivalent for these farmers and fishermen. So for question 2, they sing on the boat because they are enjoying being away from work. The answer is D. I want to just take a quick break to draw your attention to something here. One question that I often get from, you know, our students and even the parents, you know, in class is, should you read the questions before you read the passage, or should you read the passage first? The answer is it depends, right? It depends on a number of different factors. The most obvious factor is how big is the text, right? Now, this is a fairly lengthy passage. You can see that there's a page and a half of writing that goes into making up this story extract. That is definitely quite long, right? Sometimes you may see certain passages which are only about, say, 3 or 4 paragraphs, and it covers about half a page or 1 page. In those cases, you can actually comfortably go through the passage without even looking at the questions. For this particular passage, I would recommend that you do, in fact, screen the questions beforehand, at least screen question 1 to question 6, because they are mapped to the paragraphs, right? They are almost matching, not so much with the paragraph, but in the sense that they tell you, you know, where the question is going to be based on, right? Or where, you know, which exact part of the passage are the questions based on. So what is the advantage to this? Well, if I go ahead and screen the questions, you know, there's a few clues and hints I can pick up on. It says, how does Bombay appear to Hari? So I know that I'm going to be thinking about the appearance of the city, right? If I haven't read the passage, at least now I can note down something like appearance, right? Give yourself some sort of index to go back and read from. Over here, the farmers and fishermen sing and shout. So, you know, when I'm reading the passage, I'm going to be thinking about singing or shouting. And most importantly, the question is because, which means I'm going to be thinking about why. Why are they singing? Why are they shouting? If I go on to the next set of questions, in the third paragraph, who is referred to as our brother? So now that, you know, this part's highlighted and it's highlighted in the passage as well, you're going to be thinking about someone who is referred to as a brother. Hari is feeling, right? You know that you're going to be looking at for not just, you know, the main character, but also his feelings, right? What sort of emotions is he struggling with? Now, the way the test has also changed in recent times is there is a lot more of a focus on the characters. It's a skill that we call character analysis, right? And in our classes, we often encourage students to think about a number of different questions when it comes to character analysis. So let's say you've just read a text such as, you know, this one that they've given us. There are a few questions that you should just think about, you know, in your head, right? The first and obvious one would be something like, who is the main character? In this case, it's this person called Hari. It could also be the person who's referred to as the brother, Adarka. You could be thinking about, you know, why the characters are acting the way they're acting, right? Or even just what it is that they're doing throughout the story. You could be thinking about their feeling, right? What are they feeling in the moment? What are they feeling and how does it change throughout the passage, right? Emotions are dynamic, they can change. It's not just about how he's feeling now, it's also, you know, how were they feeling at the beginning, initially, right? How are they feeling towards the end, right? How do their feelings change throughout the passage? It could even be other features about the character, right? So, you know, under, you know, what the characters are doing, right? We can also be thinking about other things like, you know, what is their occupation? What do they do for a living? What is their age group, right? Do they have a particular age, right? Do they have a particular, what we call demographic? In other words, where are they from, right? There's lots of different factors you can think about when it comes to a character, but please do make sure that you are performing some sort of character analysis as you're reading the text, and you keep track of it somehow. Personally, I'm a big fan of writing things down to keep track of it, because if you write something down, at least you have something to go back and refer to. You're relying less on your memory, and oftentimes in a stressful situation like an exam, your memory may not be 100% perfect. You're better off actually writing things down as the idea comes to you. Hope that all made sense. Question 3, in the third paragraph, who is referred to as our brother? Again, not too challenging of a question if we understand the context. So it says over here, this is the part that we're looking at. Give our brother some tea to drink, right? Remember, context is key here. You want to read not only after, but also before. Now, what's happening before? Now, the temptation is most students will go straight to just 1 or 2 sentences before. Sometimes you might have to read even further than that to understand the context. So over here in the second paragraph, what's happening? Adako had to shout occasionally to remind the farmers and fishermen why they were going to Bombay. In other words, everyone was so ecstatic. Everyone was so extremely happy that they get something like a holiday, that they're singing and shouting, when in fact, they're actually going out of their villages for a very serious reason, which is to protest against the factory. Now, the leader, Adaka, he has to remind them that they're actually going to Bombay for a fairly serious reason, right? It's not just to have fun, it's to actually go protest and to stand for their beliefs. He is shouting at the farmers very often, and that's why his voice is getting hoarse. His voice is getting very rough, and he's straining his voice. And then one of the fishermen say to him, "Sit down, son, sit down for a while. Keep your breath for all the shouting that you're going to do in Bombay." In other words, save some of your voice for the protests. We're going to get you to rest. And then he says to someone else, "Hey, can you give our brother some tea to drink?" Right? Some tea, probably to soothe his throat, soothe his voice. Who he is refers to the person who was shouting, which is Adako, right? The leader of the group. That was question 3. Question 4, this was the question I was talking about before when it comes to character analysis, right? What was the main character feeling? As I said, questions like this are always tricky because you're trying to understand, their emotions. So over here, I'm specifically trying to think about the main character, Hari, and what he is feeling, right? So as you go through it, you'll notice that it mentions a few different things about him. For example, at the beginning, he talks about maybe how he's a bit lonely because there's no one else from his village. It's talking about how the weather is quite hot and how he's getting tired and thirsty. And then we get to the emotions, right? So one thing that everyone should get into the practice of doing is expand. This is just in terms of preparing for the selective test, and even preparing for things beyond the selective test, such as high school English. You want to expand your emotional vocabulary, right? Most students, when you ask them to think about emotions, they'll say very basic things like, the main character is feeling happy, the main character is feeling sad, right? He's feeling angry. But these are very basic emotional words, right? There's a whole spectrum of different ways in which you can be happy, right? Or ways in which you can be sad or angry. If you are angry, that could be like a very mild sense of irritation. Maybe you're just slightly irritated because there's a fly that doesn't seem to be going away. Maybe you are actually angry about something that's something a bit more serious, or maybe it's a very extreme form of anger, and now you are infuriated, right? Maybe you are filled with rage, right? But point being that someone who's angry, that emotion can range from here, where you're just a little bit irked, all the way over here, where you're just seeing red and absolutely exploding in fury. And so it goes for any other emotion. Some emotions are a bit more complex and can be harder to categorize, right? Perhaps you're feeling curious, perhaps you're feeling confused, maybe you're feeling ambivalent, which basically means that you're feeling a mixture of different emotions, right? Maybe you are perturbed, which again is a more sophisticated form of feeling worried about something, right? That could be slightly different to feeling disturbed. So the point is that there's a lot of different emotions. Make sure that you commit some time to learning specifically emotional vocab. Everyone is probably telling you to learn a variety of different vocab words in general, right? General vocab words, and they'll just pick random words. But I'm going to encourage you guys to, in addition, also pick emotional vocab and expand that. As I said before, the test seems to really rely fairly heavily on your understanding of human emotions. So this is a very important activity to be undertaking right now in term 4, where things are getting a bit more serious. We are ramping up a little bit more towards the exam. it says initially that he was very afraid of the journey he had undertaken, right? Without thinking. So he feels like he's just jumped straight into this journey without thinking too much about it, simply because he had been upset and angry. In other words, back when he was at the village, he was upset and angry. He wasn't happy with the way that, the lifestyle in his village was. But now that he's actually in the journey, now that he's actually moving towards Bombay, he is feeling a bit uncertain, right? The time for the change had come. He had felt that, so he knew that some sort of change was needed. He had to make the break he had been thinking about for so long. In other words, he needs to actually, in the past, he was thinking a lot about it, but now he actually has to do something about it. And the key emotion or the key question that he is considering right now is, had he done something wrong, right? This phrase is pretty much the giveaway or the answer to this question, because it says in this paragraph, how is Harry currently feeling? Right? And the way he's currently feeling is as though he had done something, not as though he had done something wrong, but he's a bit curious if he's on the right path or if he's making a mistake, right? In other words, he is a little bit uncertain. And let's have a look through the answer choices and see which one fits that the best. Option A, and remember, there's always lots of different strategies you can use, and you can actually go through, elimination for these kinds of questions if you find it a bit challenging. So something like, option A, he's worried about finding some food to eat. No, sure, it mentioned something about him maybe being, thirsty and tired, but the main emotional concern has nothing to do with food, so it's not A. B, he's lonely amongst so many strangers. Yes, there's no doubt that he is feeling a little bit lonely amongst, many strangers, but he doesn't think mainly about that, right? That's something that, it was a quick consideration at the beginning of the paragraph, but as the paragraph goes on, you can see that Harry's feeling something that's a bit deeper than just simple loneliness, right? In fact, would we say that the emotion of loneliness is a bit too strong to describe the way he's feeling? Possibly. Let's see. It says, he sat very quietly on the floor of the boat and no one paid him any attention at all. In other words, he's just sitting there very quietly, kind of thinking about his own business, right? There was no one else from Tool in his boat. It was full of strangers from other villages, right? That's just a statement. It's just saying that he is there and there's not many others, from his village. But to say that he's lonely because of that is a bit of a stretch. So I have a bit of a, like a system of symbols that, we recommend over here. The first option we just eliminated straight away. The second one you might say, yeah, it could work. It's a bit of a squiggly. I'm not 100% sure, but it's unlikely, right? It's probably an unlikely option because it's too much of an assumption. So we would consider B if there was another answer that was just as strong. C, angry about what has happened in Tool. He was feeling that somewhere in the middle of the paragraph, right? He was angry with the lifestyle, but that's not the main emotion that he's feeling in this paragraph. In fact, it's the emotion that comes at the very end where it says he's unsure about whether he should have come, right? He is not sure whether he's made the right decision. He's not sure, essentially the question that he asks at the end is, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something to the effect of, had he done something wrong? Okay. This sort of paraphrasing is actually very useful, and it's a powerful technique, not only in like these kinds of reading passages, but even in closed passages, because it is, if you don't have to write it down, but if you're at least able to say it, then it shows that you are empathizing or trying to relate to what the characters are feeling, right? So a lot of texts will simply show you rather than tell you, and in fact, you might need to be the one that tells yourself so that you've truly understood the emotions. Again, I know we're talking about some, maybe slightly more advanced things that you guys might be used to, but I think these are just strategies that, we should be learning now that it's time for. Question 5, out of the corner of his eyes, the length and structure. So remember, guys, it's not just saying what is out of the corner of his eyes means, or it was only out of the corner. It says the length and structure of the sentence help to create the impression of what, right? So this is, again, one of those questions which is asking about implied meaning. Okay, in other words, not what is actually said, but what is hinted at, right? Now, if you see something only out of the corner of your eye, that suggests that it's something that, it wasn't your main focus. It's not something that you were, concentrating on. It's just something that, maybe you were sitting there distracted by all the other things that are happening, and then something very sudden happens and you just register it with the corner of your eye. That means that, you've pretty much just glimpsed something, Okay, you've only just glimpsed it very quickly. Maybe you've glimpsed it in the nick of time, right? You've only just seen it. Yeah, and most likely that's because there is too much else to see, right? If you're seeing something just out of the corner of your eye at a very, like last minute, and again, you can go back to the actual passage and see how is it used. So if I go to, paragraph number 5, it says, they pushed and shoved. So it's talking about how there's a lot happening. They're hustling and bustling. So many people in such a great hurry, like the villagers had never seen before. And it was only out of the corner of his eyes that he saw briefly, before being pushed on, the great looming sides of steamships, and so on and so forth. So again, all of the fact that it's using very short phrases to, complete the sentence gives us that impression that, there's a lot going on here. So the answer choice that works best for that is something like, he can barely register all the sights because there's so much happening, right? You wouldn't really look out of the corner of your eye if you are terrified of getting lost, if you're having difficulty seeing things, or if you're worried about being pushed over by the crowd. And in fact, he's not so worried about being pushed over by the crowd in this particular instance. It's more just that there are so many things that he's trying to get it all in. Question 6. You do that, said the policeman. Okay, now this is one of those things that as you read through, you should also get into the habit of identifying not just emotions, but also tone, right? Again, both of these are fairly advanced comprehension skills. To understand human emotions is, difficult to say the least, especially when you're looking at a complex range of it, but so is tone, right? You can have one word which is delivered in many different tones and tonalities, which can completely change the meaning of that word or phrase. An example would be over here, right? The policeman says, you do that, he's waiting for you with tea and a garland and a sweet for each of you. Now, if you were, say, I don't know, like a really big celebrity, and if you were, prime minister, or if you're like the king of the world, and you manage to, find someone who's a great admirer and you go to their house, yeah, they could well be waiting for you with tea and a garland. A garland is basically like a lot of flowers that have been strung together, and a sweet, right? Something sweet for you to eat because they're trying to, flatter you and make sure that, you're feeling comfortable and happy. In this case, the policeman already, his tone, I would describe it as one of scorn, right? He's clearly, he doesn't think very highly of these villagers. You can see that where he says things like, where have you come from, fool, right? So it's not very friendly, clearly, he's pretty rude. Have you come straight from the pumpkin fields, right? You would describe this tone as, disparaging, right? He clearly doesn't approve of these guys and he doesn't think very highly of them. He thinks they're just, lowly farmers, right? Who've never been to the city and don't understand how the city works, yeah? And then he's, when the person, when Mahi says, we have come to speak to the chief minister, the policeman says, oh yeah, you do that, he's waiting for you. He's waiting to receive you and give you all of this, amazing stuff to welcome you as though you were the king of the world. And then he bursts out laughing again, winking at the driver. When you wink, sometimes you're winking at them because you're trying to, make fun of them, essentially, right? You are scoffing at them, right? So in this case, you would describe his tone as sarcastic, right? So clearly he doesn't actually mean it when he says that. And I'm looking at answer choices. Which of these answer choices is indeed, about him being sarcastic? Well, yeah, clearly A, he's making fun of them, right? He's jeering. I know I'm giving you guys heaps of vocab here. Again, I hope that, you're writing some of these vocabs down. You can go back and look at them. Anytime you see a new word, you should try and find, give you a bit of a crash course on vocab. You want to try and find, not just the word itself, but try and find a few synonyms so that you can understand what different ways this word can, manifest. And also try actually writing a sentence using the word. Sometimes, a lot of students find just one sentence by itself really boring to write. So in that case, I would say, okay, well, rather than writing a sentence, try writing a continuous story, right? A story where you sit there and you write a few, maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs each day, right? So you have a continuous story in your book, and every day your job is just to write out, 1 paragraph of the story. And in this paragraph, you can try using, 2 or 3 words that you have learned for the first time. Even if you're not using that exact word, you can at least try and use some synonyms of those words to not just expand your vocab, but learn how to use it in the correct way. All right, vocab is important not just for reading, but even in writing is a good way of standing out from the other students who have maybe more basic ways of writing. Question 7. Okay, this is where things get a little bit more challenging because it's not just asking about small details, it's asking about the entire extract, right? Big parts of the, like the whole text. If I look at question 7, it says, at one point in this extract, you can see that it's not very specific. It's not telling us which part of the extract to look at. All it tells us is you're trying to find some part of the story where the writer is contrasting something, right? And not only is it contrasting, but it is an explicit contrast, right? An explicit contrast is where if something is implicit, I think I was talking about that before, it's implied. Okay, so it's implied, for example, that the police officer didn't like these farmers very much, right? He doesn't explicitly say, you country farmers, I really don't like you. Yeah, it's implied, right? So in the case of this question, it's asking us for something that's explicit, right? Something that is explicit has actually been mentioned in a very clear way at some point in the text. So, you know, the best way to do questions like this, where it could really be asking you about any part of the text, would be elimination. So let's go through each option and find which one is actually explicit, which is direct, or obvious. All right. Option A, the police in Bombay and the police in Tool. Does it talk about police in Bombay? Absolutely. Does it talk about in the police in Tool, in the villages at all? Nope, never mentions it at any point in time. It's not A. Right. The behavior of the fishermen from Rewas and that of the farmers. Well, does the passage mention the behavior of the fishermen? Yes, it does, right? Does it mention the farmers and their behavior? Yes, it does. Does the text contrast them, however? Does it directly say something like, you know, the fishermen, you know, worked a very dangerous job, whereas the farmers worked a very safe job? No, it didn't say that, right? Did it say the fishermen worked very hard and very quickly, whereas the farmers were a bit more lazy and a bit more relaxed? No, it doesn't actually say that. There's no contrast anywhere, which is why B is not the best answer. So it's neither A nor B. All right. C, the commotion in Mumbai and the quiet of Tool. I can tell you straight away that this seems to be the best answer, but you know, never take anything for granted. Go back to the passage and see if you can find the exact area where it mentions the difference between these two things. All right. So if I go back to the passage and I look for where it explicitly mentions the differences between the commotion or the crowds of Bombay and the quiet lifestyle of Tool, let's have a look. Let's see where we can find that. So first thing is, if I go back to the where the villagers first arrive at Tool and are first looking at it over here. Sorry, so just to give you context, I'm looking at stanza or paragraph 5. Fellow passengers were pushing and shoving past him. He was being carried along by them. You know, he was shoved by the Bombay crowds. So many people in a great hurry, as the villagers had never seen before, right? So this is saying that the crowds in Bombay is something that's completely new. Had they been at Tool, they would have never seen that before, right? So already we get a hint of how Bombay is very different to Tool. Bombay is, again, bustling. Tool, you know, seems like a fairly quiet place, right? Over here in paragraph number 6, it says, in the midst of terrifying traffic, so there's a lot of traffic over here, Hari had not seen so much traffic as he saw on that one street. So he's seeing how busy Bombay is. That by itself is not enough. But after that, it says, in Tool, there was only the occasional bus driving down the main road of the village, and very rarely a single dusty car. In other words, he would see one bus every now and then, and to see a car was an extremely rare thing, whereas over here in Bombay, the traffic is everywhere. So that's another place where it explicitly contrasts Tool and Bombay, right? One of them is very quiet. You hardly even see any cars or buses. The other one is Bombay, which is extremely busy, and there's heaps of traffic and heaps of people, right? It's the commotion. C is correct just off the basis of that, but just to, you know, humor the question options, let's see D as well. It says the people in the docks and the people in the streets. It's not really contrasting them. If anything, they're actually acting in quite similar ways, right? All of them are rushing and you know, moving forward and just in a real big hurry. So D is not the best answer here. Question 8, comparing the beginning and the end of the extract, what change occurs? Okay, again, you're going to be looking for things that actually are explicitly mentioned. Does it mention that the beginning of the extract happens in the morning and by the end of the extract it's evening time? Not really. It doesn't tell us too much about, you know, the time frames as it progresses throughout the day, so it's not A. The group goes from being united to being divided. Okay, so no doubt the group was united at the beginning. Is there any evidence to suggest that they were divided towards the end? Not really. They are all rushing together to go speak to the chief minister, right? In fact, this person, Mahi, stays alongside the main character, Hari. So they're still together by the end of it, and it doesn't mention anything about them becoming divided. So this one, there's just no evidence for it in the passage. C, Hari goes from being overjoyed to anxious. Okay, so is Hari anxious? Yes, right? He's anxious whether he's made the right decision. He's anxious, about Bombay and just how dangerous it seems and how, busy it is and how he's not used to it. But was he overjoyed at any point in time? No, I don't think even at the beginning, he didn't seem particularly happy. In fact, he seemed he seemed very, he's just sitting there just thinking about, what's happening, and he's reflecting on his emotions. You would call him maybe pensive, but I'm not sure I would describe him as overjoyed, right? That means very happy. So it's not C. All right, so it's not A, B, or C. That means it's almost certainly D. But again, you want to make sure that you have evidence for it. So it says the perception of Bombay goes from perfect to hostile, right? So two questions we need to ask. At the beginning, was Bombay perfect? Let's have a look. So no doubt Bombay looks beautiful, right? It's, peacock blue and emerald green sea. Bombay is like a white castle. It's shimmering and it's looking pretty good so far, right? If we go a little bit further down, right, after they actually get to the city, you can see that, he is in awe when he saw the city of Bombay. So he still thinks that it's a pretty, interesting place. And it's only as he starts to see more and more of the city that his perception, and maybe even all the villagers' perception, changes. You can see that by the time we get to the end, they say these Bombay Wallahs, maybe that means people, right? People who come from Bombay, something to do with Bombay, right? They are the rudest people on earth. So he's not happy about the place, right? The police officer is not treating them very nicely. As you look over here, you can see that the traffic is described as terrifying, right? It's really scary. So none of their perception of Bombay, the new city that they've moved to, is positive. So you would describe it as hostile, right? Hostile means that something is just like very bad. It's against you. So it almost feels like the entire city is against you, right? So you would describe an enemy as hostile, someone who's arguing against you as hostile. And in this case, Bombay is hostile because of the traffic and the rude behavior. That was reading comprehension 1. That was helpful. Now we're going to move on to the poem Drifters. So poem, right? Again, keeping consistent with how the test has almost always been, following a story. They have a poem. Poetry is extremely common. Even if you're getting really high marks in your practice papers or any test that you've done, I would still recommend that you stay on top of doing a little bit of poetry practice each week. There's lots of really good websites that you can look at. One that comes to mind is Poem, something along these lines. I am again paraphrasing, but I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find something like this: Poem Analysis, right? Poemanalysis.com. I believe that's one of the good websites that you can have a look at. Essentially with poetry, the way that you should try and get into the habit of practicing is, obviously read the poem itself, right? I always prefer to read poetry section by section. So I wouldn't go ahead and, just read the entire poem and then go back and think about it. I mean, you can, and, some would argue that gives you a much better understanding of the context of the poem. But especially when I'm trying to analyze it in a lot of detail, to the level of detail that they ask questions on, I would read the poem either like line by line or after a few lines, or stanza by stanza. Right. And as you're doing that, make sure you're annotating side by side exactly what you're seeing, what things to take note of. If there's characters, do a bit of character analysis. If there's any metaphors, pay very close attention to metaphors. A lot of poetry, tends to be highly figurative, and oftentimes, things are not explicit or as it seems. So make sure that you also pay attention to the metaphors. And then once you've done that and you're happy with your analysis of it, you can always analyze or summarize. Okay, that's like the overall big picture, what's happening, and overall what are the metaphors here? Overall, what can the poem represent? And then have a look at one of those websites, so something like poemanalysis.com or even Shmoop, and then you can see what sort of analysis did someone else come up with, and does it match up with your own analysis closely? So if we're looking at a poem like this, you know, an example, I'm not going to go through the whole thing because you should have been doing that as you're doing the test, but just to give you some sort of idea, the first thing I would start with is the title. So Drifters is the title. What could the title imply? Remember, if someone is drifting, maybe they are moving, maybe they have, you know, no particular direction in which they're moving. They're just simply drifting. You know, just think about like a piece of wood that's just drifting along a lake, right? It's just moving around. There's no particular direction. That's generally the kinds of things that come to mind when you're thinking of drifters, right? Drifters, like the ERS implies that we're specifically referring to people. So maybe it's people that are moving around, people that have no sense of direction, people that have no aims or goals. These are the first things that come to mind when I see the title. Next, go through it again. Personally, for a poem of this structure, I might go through it like line by line, right? I can see that there's some enjambment that's used over here, but you know, just look at it, what's happening over here, then what's happening over here, and so on and so forth. So drifters, one day soon, he will tell her it's time to start packing, right? So he is telling her that they need to start packing, maybe they're moving. And the kids will yell truly and get wildly excited for no reason, right? So over here, I would definitely underline the keyword kids because this particular line is talking about the kids. It's also talking about how they are wildly excited, right? And then comes the pet, right? The brown kelpie pup will start dashing about, tripping everyone up. So maybe the pup is also excited. Maybe it's agitated. We don't really know. All we know that it's dashing about, you know, running back and forth. Hopefully it's excited just like kids are. And she, so we have this she character that's recurring, right? So he is telling her that they're going to move, and then it tells us about, you know, how do the kids react, how does the dog react, and then essentially how does everyone else in the household react. But it seems to keep focusing on this main character, she, right? So what does she do? She goes out to the vegetable patch and she picks up all the green tomatoes from the vines. Now it seems a bit strange, right? Why would someone pick green tomatoes? When you think of tomatoes, you would think of, you know, the juicy red vegetable, or, you know, fruit, as some people say. I think tomatoes are technically fruits, but most people consume it as a vegetable. But getting back, you know, off the tangent, you know, why would you pick a green tomato? You want like a nice juicy red one, right? If something is green, that means it's not ripe. Okay, it's not ripe. So I would take note of that. So she's kind of, maybe they're just in such a rush to, you know, leave this place that they'll just take whatever they have and leave, right? Next, and notice how the oldest girl is close to tears because she was happy here. Okay, a bit sad. So people are reacting in different ways. You know, the younger kids were extremely happy about leaving. The, you know, the lady, presumably the mum, is, you know, neutral. She doesn't really seem to convey any emotion. She doesn't seem to care too much. She just goes off and does her own thing. And then the oldest girl is extremely sad, right? She's very sad. Remember, you could say sad, or you could use a, you know, better vocab. Maybe something like she's distraught, right? She's super, super agitated and sad about the fact that she needs to leave because she was happy where she currently was. And now the youngest girl, in contrast, is beaming, right? Beaming is something you do when you are absolutely, you know, glowing with positivity. You're extremely happy that you're moving because she wasn't happy with the town they're living in. So just from, you know, the first part of the poem, you can tell that it's likely, right? Again, you need to read further to be absolutely certain, but start making inferences and start preempting what's happening. So, you know, what I would say is it is likely that family is moving. So there's a whole family that's moving away. And each person in the family, each character or member of the family reacts differently. And that's how I would kind of summarize what we've read so far. Summarizing is, again, an extremely powerful and useful technique. If you go back and have a look at some of our other videos on the channel, you can see that, you know, summaries and summarizing texts is one of the most crucial ways of understanding it better and being able to analyze it in more depth. But I'm not going to talk about that too much here. You can go back and watch the other videos where we'll go into that in a bit more depth. And the first thing that she puts on the trailer will be the bottling set that she never unpacked from Grovedale. So again, the mum's role, or the central character, she, you know, she just seems to be, again, doing all the things that are necessary for the move, and, you know, collecting all the objects and things that they actually need, right? That's, you know, how I would approach the actual analysis. Let's see if we can analyze it in a bit more detail as we go through the questions. So question number 9, who is the main focus of the poem? Again, remember we had that recurring theme of she. Now, she wouldn't be the eldest or the youngest daughter because they're mentioned by name, right? It specifically says the youngest girl is beaming, the oldest girl is close to tears. So they would not be referring to her, to those two people as she. The little dog is also explicitly mentioned as the pup, the brown kelpie pup. And it's also just doesn't make sense that they would be the main focus of the poem. But you can see that throughout the poem, it centers on, this lady who is packing, she's plucking the unripe tomatoes. She doesn't even ask where they're leaving to. When they first came, she remembers how she felt. She remembers, holding out her hands with berries. So this main character that comes throughout the poem, the central she, is most likely the mother of the family, right? And the he that told them that they were moving is presumably the father. Question 10, writer refers to green tomatoes. Okay, remember I said before that poetry is a highly figurative and, a lot of things are actually metaphors. So let's see, what is a green tomato a metaphor for? Well, when you think about what is it a metaphor for, you should be brainstorming what qualities does a green tomato have? When it comes to metaphorical analysis, let me just write metaphors, make your life easy. The first thing you should be trying to think about is, what is it literally showing or talking about or looking like, right? So what is the literal appearance / action if someone's doing something, or event, right? Just like pretty much what is it on a very superficial or literal level, right? Object, I should say. Okay, just at first glance, what is literally happening? And only then you should be thinking about, okay, what can this represent, right? So if we apply that logic, a green tomato, just brainstorm all the different things you can think of that relate to a green tomato. It's green, obviously, right? Duh, it's green. That's why it's called a green tomato. It is unripe. That's why it's green, right? Maybe a green tomato is not sweet. I don't know exactly what a green tomato tastes like. I would imagine it would not be very pleasant. Maybe it's a bit bitter. Maybe it's really, really sour. But we know that it's not sweet and it's probably not juicy the way that a ripe red tomato is, right? So ultimately, it's unripe, right? It's not desirable, yeah? And then you think about what could this represent, right? Well, remember in the context of the poem, these guys are drifters. They're constantly moving, right? And if they're constantly moving, that means they haven't had enough time, not enough time to settle. Okay, they have not been able to settle down, right? And because they haven't had enough time to settle down and they haven't had enough time to establish themselves, you could even describe this family as a whole bunch of green tomatoes, right? They are not ripe, they are not completely settled down. And in the context of that, if I look through the answer choices, the writer refers to the green tomatoes to show that the move has come too soon, right? The family hasn't had a chance to establish themselves. It's not something that's, they haven't really been there for long enough. The move is just way too quick. Green tomatoes, something that's unripe, you wouldn't associate that with enthusiasm. You could associate that with imperfection, but an imperfect tomato is probably bruised or damaged in some way. It's not really unripe, okay? And again, there's no evidence in the poem to suggest that they had a life which is imperfect. All it shows is that they just move from place to place. It's too sudden and it's too soon. Question 11, what's the effect of the repeated use of the word "and" at the beginning of some of the lines? So poetry often uses repetition. I guess if I want to get all technical, it's called anaphora when it's repetition at the beginning, but I wouldn't worry about that for the time being, just repetition. Okay, poetry often uses repetition, and whenever they use techniques like this, it needs to have some sort of effect. So what is the effect of the fact that they say "and" all the time? And the kids will yell, and the pup will start dashing about, and the mum will go to the veggie patch, and notice how the oldest girl is close to tears. The fact that, all of these things are happening in such quick succession, rapid succession, right, means that everything is happening very, very quickly, right? The effect of saying and can either be that you're adding to a really long growing list, or it could be to say that, things are happening super, super quickly, right? So again, look to the answer choices for help. If I look at my answer options, it says, it imitates the boring stability in the family's life. You could say that using "and" many times is boring. Would you describe the family's life as stable? Definitely not, right? They never really seem to settle down anywhere. They're not stable, they're constantly moving. B, it emphasizes the sudden haste following the father's decision. This works perfectly, right? They're acting very quickly and very suddenly in a very rushed way. Careful planning, yeah, there's no careful planning. They're moving very quickly. Feelings of hope, again, that's, the use of one word and can't really imply the feeling of hope unless it's used in a long list of hopeful things. B is the best answer. Question 12. What is the phrase, the bottling set she never unpacked, reveal about the family's life? Again, these guys are constantly moving from house to house, right? Let's say you move into a house, a brand new house, right? Move in here, extremely happy, and you live here for exactly, well, this house has no window, that's a bit sad. And you live here for exactly 2 weeks, right? You've packed all your winter clothes, you've packed like a bunch of furniture, you packed, some antique items, some bottling sets, some things that you don't use very often. Would you unpack all of these things if you're only going to live there for 2 weeks? Definitely not. If you're going to live there for a year, then sure, you might unpack it. But if you live there for a very short amount of time, you wouldn't even bother. And that's exactly what it shows about the family. It's that they move so often that they don't have time to put everything away, or time to unpack things in this case. 13, why does the woman decide not to ask any questions? Okay, this is again a bit of character analysis, right? You're trying to analyze and understand what's running through her head. So it says, when the loaded ute bumps down and in fact, something that's interesting to note is the question says, why does the woman not ask any questions? And they haven't actually highlighted this part for you. So what I'm trying to say is don't get too comfortable with the fact that some questions are clearly highlighted. Sometimes you could have questions like this one where it says, she won't even ask why they're leaving this time, right? You need to go and find that part, and the question doesn't actually tell you where it is. So sometimes you do have to go looking for the details. That's where underlining keywords is extremely useful, so you have some sort of reference to go back to. Another thing that might help is, again, quickly scanning the questions before you read the passage so you know what things to look out for. So if you scan question 13, you read the word questions, then as you're going through the poem, you should be on the lookout for the word questions, right? Or some sort of question. In this case, ask and question are pretty much synonymous, right? The synonyms, you ask a question. So when you're thinking and looking out for questions, you'll see the word ask. But getting back to the actual concept, it says, she won't even ask why they're leaving this time or where they're heading for, right? So the word even implies that it's something that she used to do quite a lot of, right? But now she doesn't even bother. Right? In this case, the way she says she won't even ask why they're leaving implies that she did not bother, maybe because they're moving around all the time, right? They're moving around very quickly and very often. And perhaps she doesn't, the other reason she doesn't ask is maybe she has no control. Right? Remember at the beginning, all that happened was that all it said was he will tell her, right? In other words, he, again, most likely the dad, simply went and said, okay, it's time to start packing. And then all she does is go off and pack because she's so used to that. So maybe she has no control. Maybe she didn't even bother asking because it's something that happens so often. Question 13, the option that works the best in that sense is she's eager to leave, maybe not, she doesn't really have many emotions. She's caught up with the general excitement and she's hoping her husband will change his mind. Yeah, again, there's no evidence for any of these options. A is the best fit. She has given up trying to control where the family's heading. She has no control in the situation. Bright with berries is another metaphor. Okay, if something is bright, right? For example, your future is bright, that implies optimism, right? She held out her hand when they first moved into this place, her hands that were bright with berries, and she says, make a wish, right? She says, make a wish, right? Making a wish is an act of optimism, right? It's an act of hoping for the best, right? Hope is what she's trying to do, right? And the berries signify that hope. They are a metaphor for hope. Best answer here would be D. Okay, that was Drifters by Bruce Storr, the poem. Next, we move on to closed passages. And, while I'm doing closed passages, again, let's just quickly revise. There are lots of different strategies that you can use when it comes to figuring out the right answer. At the most basic level, you're looking for keywords, right? If it said something like, Peter and his team, went on the expedition, and then, you've left off with the word expedition, maybe the second sentence would, again, recycle that keyword or look for a synonym of that keyword, right? For example, they thought this was a great adventure. Grammar, you can often find grammatical clues and the usage of words. Grammar / usage of words, that can, again, be a bit more of a subtle hint. Right, so if we said, again, same sentence, right? Peter and his team went on an expedition, we would expect that the next sentence would start with the word they or some sort of collective pronoun, right? So if you're looking through the answer choices, all the different sentences, that can help you narrow things down. Sometimes in closed passages, when you have, option 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, it's not always feasible to immediately pick the best answer, right? Sometimes that just doesn't happen. Sometimes you look at 3 and you think, that could work. Maybe 5 could also work. You're not sure which one you're picking between them. But what matters is that you can cut out 1, 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. If only 3 and 5 begin with the word they, then those are your most likely answers. Instead of choosing between 8, now you're only choosing between 2, and you increase your chances of getting it correct. The other more advanced strategy, and this is something I definitely can't cover in just one video, it's something that we kind of teach throughout the term, is sentence relationships, right? In a nutshell, in a very short and quick summary, the way I would describe sentence relationships is think about why we use certain sentences after an initial sentence, right? Why implies, what is the purpose? Sorry, the pen glitched out there. What is the purpose of this particular sentence, right? If we said something like, Matilda skipped happily to school, right? Matilda was skipping, just write the sentence, Matilda was happy, right? Matilda was skipping happily to her school, right? Then you would expect that either the sentence before or the sentence after tells us about why she was happy, or what happened that made her happy, or something that she does because she's happy, right? That's the purpose of the sentence, is to, either it's an explanation. Yeah, you can have a sequence of events, right? So something like Matilda, checked her email and it turns out that she won the lottery ticket, right? She won the lotto. Great, right? So now we have an event number 1. Yeah, that's the first thing. She checked her email and she won. That's probably going to be followed with some sort of reaction. Okay, how is she going to react because she won? Or maybe it leads to event number 2. She immediately, called up her great aunt and started celebrating. Right? But either way, these sentences have some sort of purpose, and understanding what this purpose is trying to identify what relationships different sentences have. And we'll see if there are any sentence relationships that you can use, but bearing in mind that is a more advanced strategy. The history of ice cream in Australia, if most of the times a lot of kids do have plenty of time left over in reading, because 30 questions in 40 minutes, it doesn't feel as labored or intense for time pressure. If you are pressured for time, you can kind of skip that first paragraph because there are no sentences in there that are missing, right? But reading the first paragraph will help you get some sort of context. And in this case, the title also gives us the context, which is that this passage is all about the history of ice cream in Australia. History of ice cream means that you might have multiple different types of ice cream evolving to give us what we have today. Let's jump straight into the questions. So Frederick Peters filled the first churn for the ice cream that Australians enjoy today, right? So it's likely that this guy was the first person to pioneer ice cream in Australia. He would come to Australia to check a business investment, and he began to hanker for the ice cream his mother made while he was a child. Now, a lot of people do ask me, vocab, how important is vocab? Why should we focus on vocab? Is it really that important? Is it only for writing? Does it help with reading? Since I got rid of GA, are you sure I need to learn synonyms and stuff? And the truth is, vocab is still important, and it can be important in subtle ways that you may not have realized. So me recognizing that the word hanker, if you hanker for something, it basically means that you have some sort of cravings, right? You're craving for something. That actually is very helpful for me to figure out what the missing sentence is, and it's helpful for figuring out a bit more detail about this character, this person, Frederick Peters. So Frederick Peters came to Australia because he was doing something completely unrelated. He was checking something to do with business. And as soon as he came here, he was craving the ice cream that his mother made when he was a child, right? He was very, very, keen to have that same type of ice cream. So you can assume that the next sentence is going to be telling us about either why he's craving it, right? Or maybe it's talking about, what was there in Australia was not very pleasant. It was not something that he liked, which is, again, why he's craving it. Right? The next sentence starts with the word hence. Hence, Frederick retrieved the recipes after a visit back to the US. So think about the events that happen. Event number 1 is he's craving. Okay. Event number 2 is probably telling us about why he's craving it. And event number 3 is telling us about his actions, right? What he's done. He takes it on himself to go back and try and make his own ice cream. Why would someone make their own ice cream after having cravings? What must have happened in between for someone to make their own ice cream after craving it? Sometimes, I'm sitting here craving ice cream. It's very rare for me to actually go and make it myself, right? I might start scouting for different shops. Is McDonald's still open? Do they still sell soft serves? Are there any better ice cream places? that's the kind of like, action that I might take. But this seems like a fairly desperate, act that he's doing. And, the missing link over there is either that the ice cream is really bad, right? He's, tasted something that's really awful, or it simply does not exist. Maybe there's just no ice cream anywhere in Australia and he has to invent his own ice cream shop. Look for the answer choices that fit one of these two. Either we have bad ice cream or the ice cream seen in Australia does not exist. When I do that, I'm looking through 15, options for 15. There's a bunch of different ones that may fit, but I feel like the strongest one is, I'm checking the answers again, is D. So this one here is the answer to 15, right? He claims that what passed for ice cream in Australia was a strange yellow custard-like concoction. In other words, it's bad. He's not a great fan of it. Even if it's not bad, it's just different. And it's not the ice cream that he was craving for. So this one, fits the bill quite nicely. The only other thing I can think of that might work is maybe something like the very suggestion prompts a sniff of scorn, right? So scorn is, again, when you think that something is bad or beneath you, but this is too generic, right? It has nothing to do with a person. 15, on the other hand, actually talks about what some person, some guy, he is claiming, whereas C is just way too general. And it also is again, pretty generic. It's talking about dessert purists, and there's no evidence to suggest that Frederick was a dessert purist, right? Also, there's nothing that's actually being suggested here. So C, you might think at a glance that that works, but it doesn't fit this context. Maybe A, the range only comprised of vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, and Neapolitan. So, maybe he's fed up of the variety that's happening here. But again, there's no personal touch to this one, right? With option D, it works nicely because it's something like he had cravings. He claimed that, the ice cream was strange and yellow and goopy. He decided to do something about it. So this is a sequence of events that works nicely. Question 15 is D. Question 16. Okay, let's have a look. So again, it tells us a little bit more about what Peters is doing after this fact, right? So he has, come a long way, and he has this interesting slogan. He describes ice cream as the health food of a nation, right? Talking about ice cream being really healthy, and it's a slogan that they had, right? It was emblazoned on the side of the Peters vehicles. If you looked at the van, the ice cream van, it would say health food of a nation, right? And then the author goes on to say that, this campaign, this is an ad campaign, it existed throughout the 20s up until the 1970s, but today it's a bit funny, right? We would laugh at it because no one describes ice cream as a healthy food these days, right? We have a calorific consciousness. We're very conscious and aware of how many calories are in ice cream and how if you eat too much, it's not good for your health. You might put on weight, you might clog up your blood vessels. It's just not healthy, essentially, right? So there used to be some sort of ad campaign, and then now that ad campaign no longer exists. So the best option that fits after that would be, how has the ad campaign changed? There's only one option here that talks about ad campaigns, which is marketing. All right, so that's why the answer to that one is G. Next question, let's have a look. Going back to the passage, question 17, okay? So there's a lot going on at the beginning. Again, I'm assuming that you've already read it, so I'm just gonna quickly scan through and summarize. It's basically saying that even though Peters established a lot of ice cream, there's someone else called Alex Mandelson who invented gourmet quality ice cream. So, next level, deluxe, luxury gourmet ice cream. She says, if you wanted ice cream, you went down to the local milk bar and it was really boring. It was ordinary commercial ice cream. It only had about 10% butterfat and she was disappointed. So clearly, she is pioneering gourmet ice cream because she didn't like what was currently being offered. She goes on to talk about why she doesn't like it. She notes that the ice cream on offer lacked richness. That's one reason. And there was minimal choice of flavor, right? Minimum choice, right? So we're going to try and look for options that elaborate on either ice cream being not very rich or ice cream having very limited options in terms of different flavors, right? Again, I'm not going to go straight to the answer choices just yet. I'll read a little bit afterwards to get some more context. Mandelson had childhood memories of using a hand churn to make ice cream, often flavored with fruit garnered from the nectarine tree to California home. So you can see that even from a young age, she was, flavoring her ice cream with all sorts of delicacies and interesting flavors, such as, nectarine flavored ice cream. So again, you can assume that the missing sentence, even though it could be about richness, is most likely discussing choice and variety of flavors. We've already seen an option like that. if I go back and look through them, it says the range only comprised of vanilla, strawberry, chocolate, and a mixture of those. So there was only 3 flavors to choose from, and she wanted a much bigger variety of flavors to choose from. Okay. If we keep going, she orders a hand churn. She starts, writing. She starts making, more ice cream, probably making interesting flavors of ice cream. And then someone writes an article about her. One of her admirers is writing a good article in praise of her, and then the whole thing took off, right? So the entire thing has really, gained a lot of popularity. What we can expect after that, again, make sure you read a little bit further. So we can see over here, it's talking about the beginnings, right? The early days of what she used to do. Before long, company headquarters had relocated to the Sydney, I'm going to write this over here because I don't want to turn the page just yet, Sydney suburb of Enmore, right? So you can see that at first, it just started off at a house and she was just using a hand churn. And then they established an entire headquarter base. It has walls, it has shop fronts, it has a whole bunch of different awards, and they've now moved into a different suburb, right? They had relocated. So it's talking about progress. Right? So it starts off by talking about the very beginning, then it's talking about progress. So we're trying to look for some option which is telling us about, again, just the early days of her particular company. Which option talks about the early days of a particular company? I would say the best one is probably E. It says the Serendipity ice cream was founded in the kitchen of an inner city home. Right? It's just a little house, very simple setup in a kitchen, and that's where they established ice cream of this variety for the first time. Moving on, we can expect that they're going to be talking a bit more about the progress of the company, right? It says, at last count, it was annually producing 250,000 liters, huge amount of ice cream for more than 800 customers. And those customers aren't just individuals, it's also restaurants, food stores, caterers, and airlines are supplying it for airplanes. So this is talking about the growth of the company, right? How the company is getting bigger and bigger. So again, you're going to look for an answer choice that matches that theme of growth. Which answer choice talks about, a company that's expanding and getting bigger and growing? F. Right? The answer to question 19 is F. The company's repertoire, their offerings, the things that they can do, includes more than 100 flavors, including exotic ones like green tea and wattle seed. At this point, I think we have used up pretty much all of our answer choices. Remember, I said in the previous video that you should try and cross out things once you use them. I know we've used up question 17A, 15 was D. I'm pretty sure we've used up everything except B and C. So you only need to toss up between these two answers for question 20. Looking back, question 20 says, Mandelson says the ice cream has evolved from different influences, right? So you have the Italians making gelato, which is very flavorful, and the Americans making ice cream, which is very rich. So you've got, two different types of ice cream, a bit of a seesaw here, right? You have the Italiano ice cream, and then you have the Americano ice cream. Maybe just the American ice cream. You can see that the Italian ones are flavorful, and the American ones are just rich, right? Now, American ice cream tends to be richer and more creamy. Cream, right? So asking us about cream, maybe this thing is going to talk a little bit more about cream or some sort of implication of heavy and rich desserts. But you need to read on. It says, Luigi Barroso, an Italian-born 4th generation ice cream maker, explains, we never ever use cream. To me, it doesn't fit the art of making ice cream. So he clearly is not a fan of ice cream. I mean, he's not a fan of cream in his ice cream. He prefers the Italian way of making gelatos, which is flavorful but not rich. So looking up between B and C. B says, local influence is evident in the classic flavors the company sells today. It hasn't really mentioned anything about Luigi Barroso's company so far, so it doesn't fit at this point in time. And it's also not talking about flavors, right? Sure, it mentions classic flavors and talks about how Italian ice cream is flavorful, but that by itself isn't about the individual flavors that they have, right? Looking at C, however, it says the very suggestion prompts a sniff of scorn from dessert purists. Someone who's a purist is very careful and concerned that the quality of the thing that they're looking at is top-notch, right? It's the best it can be. Luigi definitely seems like a purist, right? He's saying it doesn't even fit the art of making ice creams. We never, ever use cream. He is vehemently against rich ice cream or creamy ice cream, right? He really doesn't like this concept. And if someone is really against something, you could say that they are scornful, right? So again, linking up, it says, Americans make richer and heavier and more creamy ice cream. Cream, is that something that we should be putting in our ice cream? Well, not if you're a purist. A dessert purist would never accept that. And an example of that is Luigi Barroso. Right? Once you've answered that, you don't even have to bother reading this. Again, you can read it if you're confused about any options. You just need that little bit more context. All right, doing very well. Let's move on to the very last one, questions 21 to 30. These are I guess people have different names for them. Essentially, you have 4 extracts all talking about one theme. You can call it thematic reading, or you could call it comparative texts, right? The text where you're trying to compare and contrast the different features of each text. Key theme here is belonging, right? Belonging is a abstract and difficult concept to grasp. You can have belonging to different things, right? You can have belonging to people, you could have belonging to a place, right? You can have belonging to a culture, to a particular group. You have different ways of showing or feeling the sense of belonging. You could have, a sense of belonging to a particular, like skill or art or something like that. So heaps of different ways in which belonging can manifest. You could probably write like whole entire essays about this concept, but let's get through the actual passages themselves. Okay, key to doing these kinds of questions is, reading the passage, having a very clear and thorough understanding of all the different parts of the passage, and then going back and answering the relevant questions. If I was to give you a recipe or a list of steps, I would say step 1, read extract A. Read the first extract at the beginning, then go back and answer relevant questions. Okay, so what I mean by that is, you have question 21, 22, 23, 24, and blah, blah, blah. Go back and check which of the ones, actually have an answer that fits, right? Maybe 21 is A, 22 makes no sense for A. Maybe 23 also makes no sense for A, or 24, 25 also seems to fit the bill, right? Once that's done, then you can go back and read the next one, which is B, right? Now that I've read B, I can say, okay, like 22 makes sense for B, 23 still doesn't make sense, maybe 24 makes sense for B, right? And then you can go back and again, read through extract C and pick the ones that fit the bill for C, and then the ones that you're left with will inevitably be extract D, right? That's a strategy you can use to save time. Again, I'm not sure if you will be running out of time, but in case it happens, you can rely on this process. And it's also just a way of being a bit more sure in terms of what you're reading, because otherwise you might read all the extracts and forget about them by the time you do the questions. Right. Again, if you're really, doing very well in terms of time and you have heaps of time left over, you may want to scan through the questions first before you read the passage. But regardless, the key skill is to be able to summarize and analyze what you've read. So if I'm looking at extract A and trying to summarize it, what are the key words and ideas that are mentioned here? The first one, the very first sentence, gets us started. It says, do you give much thought to whether you are an includer or not, right? An includer, that's a quality that we might not be able to develop ourselves, and we might not even, encourage children to develop it, but it's talking about how it is really important to be inclusive, right? It's actually a skill to, include other people, to make them feel welcome and to make them feel like they have a sense of belonging, right? Remember, the key theme here is belonging, and you should see how you can link it back. For example, a child at a preschool that is sharing with their friends, right? An adult who keeps an eye out for people that don't, feel very comfortable and actually makes them feel included. A colleague who shows a new person around the workplace to make them feel included, right? These are things that the author says is very important. They also say that, for a lot of adults, if you see a child standing by themselves, it doesn't feel great. You actually, it haunts many adults, right? No one wants to see, an innocent young child standing in the playground, not belonging, very lonely and sad, right? That's a really negative thought. You don't want that, yeah? And it's talking, further about how, being able to include others and being able to feel like you are being included is it's very important. It affects how other people see you and how you see other people and how you see yourselves also, right? Sometimes we underestimate what we can do, we overestimate what other people can do, but the author is trying to say that, we should try and be proactive and become an includer, because it's an important skill and quality. If I go through the questions now and see which one fits the bill, well, let's see. Pride in having a dual sense of belonging. It's not really talking about two different ways that you could belong. So it's not, 21 doesn't work. An experiment, nope, this passage doesn't mention an experiment at all. Modifications to the landscape, no mention of landscape in this one. Commonly held belief about the best way to bring up children, maybe. I'm not 100% sure about this option, so I would for this one put maybe A, but I'm not going to write it in 100% because I'm not 100% sure. Sometimes you might find as you read that this is a better fit, so we'll come back to that one. 25, making others feel welcome is a neglected skill. Yeah, this is definitely mentioned, right? Making others feel welcome is being an includer. And it's a neglected skill because we can easily fail to develop it and we might not value it in our children. 25 is definitely A. Similarly, 26, liking the same thing. No, it's not talking about liking the same thing. It's talking about, including others actively. So it's not that one. It refers to a youthful experience that makes people sad to think about. Okay, does it mention anything about making people sad to think about something? Yes, it does. It talks about how if you see a child on a playground all lonely, it's a sad thought, right? So it mentions that. Youthful experience, yes. Youthful implying someone like an experience for young people, in this case, children. 27 is almost certainly A as well. And if you screen the others, you can see that none of them are A. So for now, I only have 2 options for A, which is 25 and 27, but maybe 24 might work. So I'll just put a note there and keep an eye on it. Moving on to extract B. Okay, a sense of place is the most important pillars of our psyche. What does that even mean? In a nutshell, it's just talking about belonging, and I think I mentioned this before, right? Belonging to a place. Okay. Talking about belonging to a particular place. And if you read through it, you'll find, again, more places, like them elaborating on that. So it's talking about how, they grew up in a place called the Grampians. And if you look at the footnote, it says that there is a traditional and Aboriginal name for this. So again, this is just a place. Right now, it is one of the favorite times. She's talking about how she really likes the place. She likes, trekking, and it's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's something that they personally really enjoy. However, they don't like it when their land gets affected, right? When things go wrong here, it makes me angry. I don't like it when strips of land are bulldozed. It doesn't even matter what reason, whether it's like, to prevent fires or whatever, the person just doesn't like it because it affects their sense of belonging, right? They don't like that the wilderness is broken up because they see the wilderness as a legacy of a different era, as a leftover from a different time period, right? And not just a leftover, an important thing to be treasured, right? Legacy. I hate the rubbish that people sometimes leave behind. So she doesn't like that people are littering and throwing their garbage into this place because they feel such a strong sense of belonging there. Right? And because they have so many happy memories from the time they've spent there. Going through the options, again, you're going to be looking for things that talk about, belonging to a place, or, how the person feels angry when their place gets disrupted. So looking through that, if I were to jump straight to the answers, 23 is B. It says, is critical of modifications made to the landscape that the writer loves, right? Indeed, they mentioned that there is a place that they really like, and they don't, they get very angry when changes are made to it. So 23 is B. I'm looking a bit further ahead. 29 proposes that a connection to home is vital for your overall well-being. It does talk about a connection to a home. Does it talk about it being vital? Maybe not, maybe yes. This is one that we're not 100% sure about because it's implied. So for this one, again, you might want to put a note here and just say maybe B, right? That way, when you read ahead and you know it's not C or D, then it's probably going to be B. 30 suggests that a favorite pastime might not give others a sense of belonging. This is explicitly mentioned. It's talking about how trekking through a damp forest is not everyone's cup of tea. Right? I'll find that for you guys. Trekking through a damp forest, it's over here, is not everyone's cup of tea. And I've had the tracks largely to myself. And she also mentions happy memories. So even though it's something that is cold and wet, and it's not something that everyone enjoys, for the protagonist, the main character, the persona finds it very, very enjoyable and describes it as glorious. So it's about how one thing, different people have different experiences. What can give you a sense of belonging might not give someone else a sense of belonging. Right. So far I've got the answers for, most of my questions. I guess I'm a little bit uncertain about 24, I'm a bit uncertain about 29, right? A bit uncertain about both of these. That's completely fine, guys. If there's one thing that you should be aware of, and one thing that your tutors and parents should be telling you, it's that you should be comfortable. Okay, you should become comfortable with uncertainty. right? Now, I'm not saying that if you're sitting there and you're constantly guessing yourself and you don't know if it's option A or option B, I'm not saying that if that happens for the whole test, it's a good thing, right? What I'm trying to say is if you have situations where you are uncertain, don't feel bad. That's very natural and very normal in most exams. Any sort of competitive exam, dealing with uncertainty is a critical skill, right? When I say you should be comfortable with uncertainty, what I mean is you should know exactly what to do to decrease your chances of being wrong, even when you're uncertain, right? So in this case, I'm not sure if 24 is the best, what the best answer is. I'm not sure what the best answer for 29 is, but by drawing my attention to them and having some sort of backup answer choice, right, I am comfortable with my uncertainty, right? I'm comfortable that if I really don't get an answer that's 100% correct, I have an answer that's maybe higher than 50% likely to be correct. Let's go on to the other passages. Extract C. Think of a favorite lullaby or a song, right? So this one's mostly talking about how music is a way of communicating belonging. When you sing a national anthem, that's a sense of belonging to your country, right? When you're singing a common song, maybe you and your friends are singing a song, you feel a sense of belonging to each other, right? To your group. So they're saying that music has more purpose than just entertainment. It actually influences how you get along with other people. And then they give an example of a study that proves this. So looking through the questions, which one talks about either music or some sense of belonging through musical experiences, or even which one mentions a study. Now, I do remember seeing this somewhere. If I look at this one here, question 22, it says, describes an experiment measuring perceptions of belonging. Now, 22 definitely explicitly mentions an experiment or a study that they undertook. So 22 is definitely C, right? So just to confirm so far, I have C, B, I don't know what 24 is. I said it could be A, but I'm not 100% sure. I said 29 could be B, but I'm not 100% sure. And then if I keep going, 25 we said was A. 26 we haven't done it yet. 27 we said was A, and 30 I should say we said was B. Right. So this is what I know for sure. These are the ones A and B that I'm not 100% sure about. And now I can answer the ones for C because I've actually read C. So 22 is definitely C. It talks about an experiment and talks about some perceptions of belonging, right, through music. If I keep looking down, I can see that liking the same thing helps to establish a sense of belonging. In this case, it's liking music. So 26 is almost definitely C. Now, 28 talks about an ongoing struggle. There's no struggle in C. 21 talks about dual sense of belonging. There's no dual sense of belonging here. So, and 21 and 28, there's no uncertainty, right? I'm not confused about what those are. So they're most likely D. Okay, I'll even tell you where the giveaway for that is when it comes to D. So first one, dual sense of belonging. If I look through what D is all about, it's talking about how, the protagonist, or the persona, she is, part Larikia and Tiwi, right? An Aboriginal, so she has Aboriginal heritage. And they also have Irish, Roman Catholic heritage, right? So they have two different cultures from, which they get their sense of, which they get their ancestry and their sense of belonging. That's exactly what question 21 says. Refers to pride in having a dual sense of belonging. If you read further, it will tell you that she's actually quite happy about her background, how the background doesn't dilute their experience or diminish their identity. It actually enhances it, and they're very grateful to have two, cultures or heritages in which they can feel that belonging. And then the next question, it's talking about how the mother would take her out to protest meetings because her people have one of the longest ongoing land claims. This one mentions land claims as a small detail, which is why question 28 is also D. It's about land ownership, right? It's a dispute between who owns the land. I think I've covered everything except for question 29 and question 4, right? Now, 24, we said it could be A, and after having read D, it could be D as well, right? Let's start with that one. So a commonly held belief about the best way to bring up a child. Does A actually mention any clear ways of bringing up a child? Not really. I guess it says that, it's things that we may not value or develop. Maybe it's encouraging us to, foster this quality in children, develop this quality in children. But it's an uncommon value, right? It's something that we easily fail to develop. It's not something that we pay attention to, and it's not something that we ask, children to develop either. So to say that it's a commonly held belief is wrong, right? It's not A. Why would D be a better fit? So D says, just having a look through it, it says, things like, they say, right? They say implies that it's a common belief, right? They say it takes a village to raise a child, and that was my experience, right? My grandparents, uncles, and aunties always stepped in to babysit. So in other words, there is a commonly held belief that, raising a child is not just mom and dad, it's actually a lot of other people, a whole village, right? So your relatives, your grandparents, uncles, aunties, people that are related to you, maybe even friends, family friends, and other people that are part of a close group, right? The word village is used loosely over here, it just means close group. So that is a commonly held belief, right? And it's one that the persona and her family believes in as well, which is why the answer to question 24 is D. Okay. And the very last one we had was 29, proposes that a connection to home is vital for your overall well-being. Well, extract D didn't really change our mind, right? It doesn't talk about a connection to a home. There's only one passage here which talks about a connection to place, right? A is about inclusion. If I was to really summarize it in one word. B is about belonging to a sense, a place, gaining a sense of belonging from a place. C is about experiences. I'm not gonna say music, because music is an experience that people use to get a sense of belonging. And D is about it's about I guess heritage, but specifically about different cultures that bring up a child over common or shared beliefs, right? So when you put all of these into context, only one of them talks about place, which is why the best answer for 29 is B. Okay, the way it's implied is it says things like, she feels that it's glorious, she feels very happy, she has good memories of the place. If you have good memories and you're happy, then your overall well-being is quite high, right? You're very happy and healthy, right? And they only get that because they're connected to their place, they're connected to their home, to their land. It's another reason that 29 is B. So in summary, the answers are D, C, B, D, A, C, A, D, the last two will both be, right? Both to do with a place and a pastime in that place.